Get ready to hear some timeless historical radio broadcasts. Thank you for visiting Golden Age Radio. Listen to the complete NBC and CBS D-Day broadcasts on rebel.com/C/GAR. Support our veterans by visiting veteransradioministry.com. Let's honor their sacrifice. Thank you.
Station WEAF, New York. The following program may be interrupted for news flashes as they are made available. It is now 1 p.m. GRUEN, Gruen Precision Watch Time. An ideal watch time.
Mama, I'm glad where you don't have to worry. And then you were ashamed because you knew she wasn't not that kind of person. She worried for all the right things. She believed in her faith and in a good fight. Her worrying would be the right way. You turned on the radio, you turned it off. You heard a hymn. You were wishing they'd play Beautiful Isle of somewhere. Beautiful Isle. Where you live anew, land of the true. They read your favorite psalm, that one about not being afraid of the terror by night. You heard them talking about those great lines in England, standing there patiently, orderly, waiting to give their blood for the boys who would be wounded. You thought, I wonder if the Red Cross would take my blood right now. And then you remembered with relief war bonds. At least you could buy 1, 2, as many extra war bonds as you could. But you still wanted to give your blood. Maybe save a boy's life. That was the thing your heart wanted. And then again that prayer, oh God, God, take care of him. What a day. Invasion Day, a day out of time. I listened all day to our station. NBC, I was proud of NBC. I don't think I've ever been prouder of belonging to an organization. All day long, not a commercial. All day long, prayers, hymns, stirring music, and these reports coming in. All day long. It was something I can never forget. The voices of our friends. Bob St. John, Caesar Searching, John Goddard, John W. Vandercook, Robert Danton, who's right here now, whose boy is over there somewhere. Right there, isn't he, Bob?
Yes, he is. Right there.
The captain?
Yes, and soon to be a major.
Bless his heart.
Well, that's what I did yesterday.
And you were reading the news?
Yes, at that moment, a flash was handed me. Of course, we never have time to look the flashes over. Possibly it's just as well. But when it said that there are 11,000 planes flying out to make this tremendous invasion, why, of course, I had my boy right up there in the sky with me.
Yeah.
I know. It's probably, I think, the longest prayer ever said in less than a second.
The prayer you said. I know.
Maybe a comma.
Well, I think it was the one I said, isn't it? God, take
Just
care
that.
of them. Take care of all of them, God. Please, God. Ben Ames Williams, our guest today, said almost a year ago, was it a year ago when you were on with us? Well, anyway, whenever it was, you had predicted shortly before that there would be a great many books that would have a religious angle, that people would go back to religion. And, in reading your book that we're going to talk about later today, Leave Her to Heaven, I marked one place where the man breathed your kind of prayer, Bob Danton. It's curious, isn't it, what's taken possession of all of us. Irreligious. Is there a word? Irreligious? Unreligious. Unreligious men and women suddenly are praying. Sometimes they don't know what they're praying. But they know why. They know why. It's because They've got to have something more than is in themselves, something more that's in this world around us. They've got to have it. And so they prayed. And there was Bob Danton. And all of this was coming out. Remember, Bob, the day we had the nationwide broadcast
Yes.
about the preparations. And there they were, just as we'd said they'd be.
Those same men that are sitting right here where we are now.
John Vandercook over there somewhere.
Bill Chaplin,
Yes.
St. John.
Yes. And Brooks, Bill Brooks, I suppose, up at least 48 hours without sleep, wasn't he?
You have no idea. I kind of wish that you might have been there in our newsroom as this business went on.
Do you know why I didn't come? I longed to come, but I was afraid of being a nuisance.
I don't think that you ever could be a nuisance.
Well, I was just afraid that it would be one more person, but I could picture every bit of it. The tickers going, men in their shirt sleeves rushing around, their eyes gaunt and weary, but going on and on.
Mary Margaret, you never would have been a nuisance. And don't take this in an uncomplimentary way, but I don't believe anybody there knew that anybody else was there.
I see. Well, that's how you knew I wouldn't be a nuisance. That takes me down a notch or two. Oh, well, tell anything about it, Bob, that you want to say.
Well, to give a picture of the coverage, the invasion coverage as it is from an announcer's point of view, it's very seldom that we knew exactly where we were going until within maybe 5 seconds. And sometimes while we were reading bulletins, we'd have to pick up a phone in one hand and we'd get a cue from Ad Schneider of the special events.
Bless
Mr.
his
Brooks.
heart.
Bless
He's
his,
one of my favorites.
a monument to that boy, let me tell you. And he very calmly, in the midst of all this, I won't say it's confusion, but tenseness is a weak word. He'd say, job 24, go to London, Bob. I don't know what for. Go to London, 24. London, then maybe they wouldn't come through. Then Elmer Peterson or Robert St. John would suddenly, I'd look over there, and they were sitting beside me, and I'd calmly turn the microphone over to them. And then they would fill in the necessary time. And all in all, I think the thing went off beautifully. I don't know how they did it.
No.
Nobody, the public has no idea of the immensity of the preparations and of the actual soul-killing work that those men went through. I'm not speaking of the announcers now.
No, you're talking about the newsroom.
Yes.
And all those men.
That desire to bring it to the people, to get it to them as accurately and as honestly as they possibly could. I give great credit to them for it.
Oh, well, I just think it was thrilling. It couldn't have been more so. And then last night when I heard Fred Waring
Oh, that is perfect.
doing the battle hymn, Vincent,
Oh, yes.
and then doing The Time Is Now, The Time Is Now, it must have been as stirring as our party. I'll never admit anything could have been more exciting and stirring than our party, but he had 1,000 veterans in his theater. I mean 1,000 boys.
It's true.
I didn't mean veterans. Well, maybe they were at that. It seemed to me that's what
Servicemen?
they said. But I thought of servicemen. That was what I was thinking. Well, isn't it? Were you listening, Ben Ames Williams?
No, I wasn't listening. It didn't seem necessary.
You just knew.
You had the feeling that you were together with so many millions of people in the world, whether you were listening or not.
Yes.
The feeling of unity in the world yesterday was the thing that struck me more than anything else.
And the churches, the people in the churches, women with work-scarred hands, all alone. Here a serviceman and his wife or his sweetheart, you couldn't tell, one still here, you know, all praying. I don't know. What do you think has happened to the world? It's in great travail and it turns to something?
Well, that has always been true, of course. The old saying, the devil was sick, the devil a saint would be.
Mm-hmm.
The devil was well, the devil a saint was he. When we're in trouble, we turn to some power and look for help. That's the thing which is instinctive in us all today, the submission to a power which we can't define. We can only be sure it's there because we know we need it.
Mm-hmm.
And we have learned by experience that when we need things badly enough, we usually get them one way and another.
Yes.
That sense of submission to an outside power.
You say that and leave her to heaven.
Do I? Well, I've forgotten.
Let me see. I want to... may I just read that one little bit? I put down the number of the page, at least I hope I did. You always think you put things down, and then you haven't. 412, I think, is the one that I wanted. You remember anything about Ben Ames Williams, Vincent?
I remember his last appearance here with pleasure.
Do you remember that he was born in Missouri?
No.
You were raised in... Oh, Mississippi. How could I have made such a mistake, and me from Missouri?
That's
Well,
a
you
terrific
started
mistake.
off right.
Yeah. Well, then you went to Ohio, didn't you?
Yes.
And then you went to Boston. I'm right on those. And you were a newspaper man there. And I remember you're saying that whenever you got to writing in a rut, you wrote another way, even if magazines wouldn't take it. Say that something like the Saturday Evening Post had taken everything in the world that he wrote for a long time. Then he began to write a different kind of thing. That takes courage.
No, it resulted simply from the fact that I didn't want to be bored.
Or it bores you to write in the same way or to
It's
sell to the same.
very tedious to be doing something you know you can do.
Of course, I have to tell you what Annie Laurie Williams, our favorite agent, said to me today. Said, you know what? I've just sold Leave Her to Heaven. That's Ben Ames Williams' latest book that's out today for $100,000 to the... And I don't remember
She
to whom.
told me about it, too, to Fox.
To Fox. Did she just tell you today?
No, I knew about it.
You knew about it before. Well, having said that, I will now read you what he says about... This is his hero, who sat on the edge of the bed thinking what his life had been. And at last, without realizing the strangeness of his own action, it was a thing he'd never done before, he knelt, his head pressed on his crossed arms. He prayed no formal prayer, yet his thoughts shaped humble, grateful words. I've made as many mistakes as most men, he said to God. Probably I've made more. But Ruth, that's his wife, loves me, and so I'm the richest of men. Nothing can take that away from me, and having her love, I'll go through whatever's coming and never damn my luck. I'll need help, need all the help I can get to be what I want to be to her, but I'll do the best I can. And then, you say, humility and surrender brought him peace. And he who had lain wakeful through the dark nights, there on his knees beside the bed disordered by his tossing, slept for a while as a child sleeps, his head pillowed on his arms. Yet he was in terrific trouble.
Yeah, he was in a tough spot.
He was in a very tough spot at that moment. And so, Bob Danton, we're wishing your boy all the luck there is, and he'll be in every prayer that I say from now till the end.
Aren't you lovely? Thank you very much.
He often has done our station breaks or announcements, what is they call them, Vincent?
Station identification.
And he has red hair, and I like him a lot. Red hair is my favorite kind of hair. And red hair is lucky. I wonder if his boy has red hair.
I don't know.
Well,
He's left us now for the moment.
yes, he's left us now. Well, come on. You know, the thing about you, Ben Ames Williams, I don't know what to do with you. You have the doggonest ability to create a character, a perfectly loathsome person in many ways. And then you go to reading about this terrible woman, and there you are, yourself, me. Bits and pieces of her are me. And I'll bet everybody who reads about her will have that same awful, shocked, horrified, worried feeling. Those are mild words to what I felt.
Well, that's an entirely new point of view for me, and it never had occurred to me that anybody would recognize herself in...
Well, I only mean in parts. I hope that I would never be quite what your Ellen is. Ellen is... well, tell her how you happened to write this book about the 7 deadly sins.
Well, this is, as I've said before, this is a book about the 8th deadly sin. I started many years ago with a vague idea that I might write a series of novels or magazine stories, each one dealing with one of the 7 deadly sins. But as I said to some people in Boston the other day, when I came to gluttony and sloth, I thought I was getting too personal, so I gave it up.
I wouldn't exactly call you slothful. How many books have you written?
Well, I think about 33 or 4 stories might have been published as books, but of course I've written a great many magazine serials, which might as well have
you've
been
not
books.
exactly been lazy. Such books as The Strange Woman, that's another one of those women. And Come Spring, and Threads of Scarlet, The Strumpet Sea, and Splendor. And, you know, I don't know Amateurs at War at all.
That's a very fine book, but I didn't write it. I just wrote an introduction to that,
Oh,
and some introductions to the things that are in it. That's a bunch of first-hand accounts of the way Americans have fought in this and in other wars.
really?
And my function was just to tell why the battles were fought and how they were fought, so people would understand what they were reading about.
Well, now go on about the eighth deadly sin.
Well, eventually, I decided to write a book about jealousy, and I wrote this book in rather a curious way. I set out with the idea it might be a psychological novel, but it became obvious that in this extreme type of personality, melodrama was almost sure to come along. So in the first draft of this book, the first 400 or 500 pages perhaps consisted largely of my explaining to the reader what the characters were thinking when they did and said certain things. And then I cut all that out after I got it clear in my own mind and just let the characters do and say those things without explanation, hoping that the reader would be able to understand them as well as I did without any explanations.
That's it. I understand them all too well. That woman who was willing to lie or almost anything to dramatize herself and to have her way. Your Ellen.
Yes, she was willing to do almost anything.
Yeah.
Anything, as far as I can tell.
Well, he said, leave her to heaven means that she defied every natural law. She was able to escape all the penalties.
Did you recognize the quotation, by the way? We neglected to put that in the book. Do you know where it comes from?
You know that I'm ashamed to say I don't exactly,
Well,
but it was very familiar to
Mrs.
me.
Williams discovered it when we were groping around to try to get a decent title. It's in what Hamlet's father says to him in the second appearance, I think. He says, in effect, as for your mother, you remember Hamlet's mother had misbehaved in various ways. As for your mother, contrive against her naught. Leave her to heaven and to the thorns which in her bosom lodge to prick and sting her. So that it really fits this book
Oh, it's
surprisingly
too
well.
bad you didn't put it right in.
We hope to do that in the second 400,000.
Yes, the second million. Vincent, did you recognize it?
No, I didn't. Like you, it sounded familiar to me, and I couldn't place it.
I just thought I would have said I would have said Shakespeare, I guess. I always say Shakespeare, the Bible, because it's very
safe.
Very
The best
safe.
things
Yeah.
are there.
It's very, very safe. I wish, though, that you'd blow some of the cobwebs out of our brains by telling a little about that ranch. I had a feeling it was a real ranch that you knew, where you saw the turkeys and where you saw
Yes,
the
it
wild
is.
horses.
It is. I went out there in 1928 or thereabouts with a group of friends on a visit to the place, and went out again the following summer and knew it very intimately. And as you may gather, it made quite a strong impression on me. It's out in the New Mexican mountains, just about as I described.
And their horses as
I
wild
think
as
now, as a matter of fact, that whole ranch has been given to the Boy Scouts of America, so that they have a wonderful place.
You made those turkey gobblers sound bigger than any turkeys that I ever saw.
I never forget how big they looked the day I saw them coming down the canyon. I shot one of them myself, and almost dropped dead running to catch him, just as the fellow in the book did.
They're wild turkeys.
Oh, yes, they're wild turkeys.
And how many are in a
Well, there
flock?
were about 6 in that particular group.
Mhm.
The one I shot weighed about 25, 26 pounds. Big bird.
Mhm. And they were so remote from human beings that it took a good deal to startle them, didn't it?
No, they're quite shy. As I suggest in the book, I was alone on this occasion. Ellen was not with me. I lay there very quietly for a couple of hours waiting for them to come along, and lay even more quietly after they came in sight until they did come near me. Kenneth Roberts was with me that day, but he was in another spot further down the canyon, and I got the shot before the turkeys got to him. So he came up and helped me get the bird on the horse and so on.
Oh, Kenneth Roberts was with you, not Ellen. This is an actual scene
Much prefer
in the
Kenneth.
novel. Yes, I prefer Kenneth for you, too. Charles Francis Cole was on our program the other day, and he said that you and Kenneth Roberts, or you at least, started him writing fiction.
Well, that isn't true, because before I ever met Charlie, he had written 3.5 million words of fiction, all of which he had sold, and that's quite a lot of fiction for anyone.
Well, I thought you'd be glad to know that he was giving you credit, anyhow. I think it's Kenneth Roberts that he takes the credit for starting to write fiction.
Well, I don't think that's true either, Kenneth Lucy.
Listen, are you going to...
Kenneth wrote fiction long before he ever met Charlie.
What am I going to do about this?
I don't know. Take it up with Mr. Coe, I guess.
Yeah,
I'll tell you, one of the most interesting things about Charlie is that you enjoy everything he says, regardless.
We certainly did. I heard from his publishers today, and they said that they'd had more letters on the program than he did with us than almost anything.
He's a wonderful fellow.
Well, I want him to come to my birthday party because I said, you really have wrestled, haven't you, in the garden? Well, he said, not that garden, but the other one. And then later he told me, now, after all, why have you got to bring that up? I'm a writer now. He said,
it's a wonder he didn't say no, but in the Garden of Eden, it would have been just like
No, he didn't. You want to talk a little about Ellen?
No, I
You think
said
she's
all
an
I have to
exception,
say
don't
about
you?
her.
You mean it's in Leave Her to Heaven?
Yeah.
You're just leaving it to the prospective purchasers to go out and buy Leave Her to Heaven and read about it.
It's a year or more since I finished the book, and so I'm a little stale on it.
Would you care to have me tell you about Ellen?
I'd be delighted. I'd like to get the dispassionate point of view on her.
Well, she's simply beautiful. He meets her, the hero of this book, meets her on a train, and his description is full of words like frankincense and myrrh, at least the feeling of frankincense and myrrh, and skin that the blood is right underneath, rushing.
You've got me blushing now.
I'll fix you. I'll really fix you. You won't talk about your heroine? All right, I'll talk about your heroine. And you can tell he's fallen for her, but he has that little feeling. He can sense in her, perhaps, this passionate intensity that is going to try to wreck his life. And she thinks he looks like her father, who's dead, and she had this jealous absorption in her father. You know, one of the scenes in the book that when he's with his children and he comes upon them, she comes upon her scattering the ashes of her father. And you describe it so beautifully. She rides a horse wonderfully, this Ellen, and she's hugging to her bosom as a woman would a child this container where the ashes of her father are, and she's scattering them like a well, it must have looked like a frieze of old where a sower going out to sow, and she's scattering these ashes. And you think that she doesn't know anybody in the world is watching her, and then later it comes out that she knew all the time that he was there, and so she, even after all the ashes are scattered, she scatters a few more or pretends to. There's a key to Ellen, don't you think?
Putting on an act.
Sure, she was always putting on an act. And yet she was, her jealousy and her intense love, if you could call it love, they were real, weren't they?
They seemed so to me when I was writing the book.
Would it hurt your feelings if I would say that it seems to me you make much worse women than you do men? Worse in the sense of they're such
my cue not to say a
dreadful
word.
women. Well, look at the strange woman. Now, you know that she was not a pleasant woman. You haven't forgotten her, have you?
No, I haven't forgotten her.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I will.
No.
Because people keep asking me where I found her, and keep asking Mrs. Williams what sort of a man I must be to write about such people.
Maybe
Keep asking my friends what kind of woman Mrs. Williams must be for me to write about such people.
Oh, well, I just think you knew them all before you knew her. Anyway,
I've known her since we were 16. So.
You have? Isn't he baffling?
He certainly is. He gets out of things beautifully.
Can you think of any measures I can use with him, Vincent?
No, I can't offhand.
No, I think that Mrs. Williams is like Ruth in Leave Her to Heaven.
Yes, she is.
I felt that very much because you created a beautiful character in Ruth. Ruth is the...
There's an interesting thing. Now, you've talked quite a lot about Jenny in The Strange Woman and about Ellen in this book, but this is the first time you've mentioned Ruth.
Because Ruth, after all, is subordinated to Ellen. Now, don't tell me she
The real
isn't.
answer is that the unpleasant women are much more interesting to you and to the reader than the pleasant ones, isn't it?
So that's why you...
That's why you prefer books about unpleasant women.
Well, I don't know. You have me there, Ben Ames Williams. It's true. But I still think that it's the way you've written Leave Her to Heaven. Ruth, after all, is she's an adopted sister of Ellen's, And she comes into the book in just that way that an adopted sister would. Everybody asks her to do things. She's cheerful and kind and obliging and never suspects the worst about anybody. But those are not as dramatic, are they?
Like the old saying that a newspaper can't come out with a headline saying no news today.
No, that's perfect.
It's only when abnormal things happen that the outsider is interested.
What was it you said? As a younger man, you thought that stock drama rarely touched normal lives? But as you grew older, you found it did.
As I came to know more and more people, I found that in most of their lives there was something which was definitely on the dramatic side.
Yes.
After all, life is the fundamental drama.
It is. It's dramatic, but it's not pointed up the way fiction is, I've decided.
Well, in fiction, you simply leave out the undramatic parts.
And that, otherwise, it would be as dull as life often is, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Fiction.
I've finished, since I wrote this, I've finished another book, which is about the most ordinary people in the world, whose life was intensely dramatic.
What sort of people were they?
Well, I don't want to go into that
Oh,
now. because
honestly, I knew he was going to say that.
It took me 50,000 words to write it, and it would take me at least an hour and a half to explain it.
Well, may I just explain one little thing to you? You see, by the time you've written it and it gets in the book form, then you forget the one you've just done. So when I ask you back when the other one comes out, you will have forgotten it. But then now's the only time we ever will hear anything from you about it.
What you should be asking me is what the book I'm going to write in 1956 is going to be about.
Well, what is it?
Well, as a matter of fact, I think very seriously at that time writing a book about adolescence.
In 1956?
I think by that time I'll be just the right age to understand it.
Should I ask him now how old he is now?
I don't think so, no. He wouldn't answer you anyway.
No, he certainly wouldn't, and I shuddered to think what he would say.
You remember you got me started the last time I was here, and they almost had to cut us off the air.
What did you say last time?
You got me mad, and I swore. You remember that?
I got you mad?
Well, you got me talking about something about which I felt strongly.
Not politics, I hope.
Well, it may have been.
It was a little political. Yes, I remember.
Yes, I seem to recall.
Sorry the subject came up, Archie. It's been a good deal better if we just let that
Better
go.
left unsaid.
Yeah. So we're about to have a couple of conventions. Yeah.
Why two? Why two?
Why have two conventions?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you better change the subject since you have this book on adolescence that you're going to write, Ben Ames Williams. Why do you want to write a book on adolescence, apart from the fact that you think by then you'll understand adolescence?
Well, I've wanted to ever since I was a child.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been tried, and tried with tremendous effect. In this book, Peter Dominic, may I be forgiven for recommending another book?
Well, I think it's very generous of you.
There's a very swell book recently published about adolescence. And if you haven't read it, you ought to read it.
What's its name?
Peter Dominic.
Peter Dominic. Who wrote it?
I don't remember offhand.
It's the first novel by somebody or other. I forgot his name.
Well, I certainly will.
But it's a book which is well worth reading.
Do you think that adolescents are tortured in their souls? Do they suffer?
Well, of course. No human being suffers so much, as a 6-month-old baby, unless it may be a 3-month-old baby. There's no possible torment so great as that which is expressed by a baby's crying.
I think they just
See,
do
their
it.
sense of perspective isn't as even as ours. So when anything happens to them, they think this is the ultimate catastrophe. As you grow older, of course, your susceptibility to torment decreases. You become calloused. And perhaps at adolescence, you are capable of greater suffering than at any other time in your life.
You haven't got
Because
a callus.
you still have the lack of perspective which goes with youth. And the beginning of understanding, which enables you to get the shades of suffering that you couldn't get when you were younger, and that you won't get when you're older.
It's very beautiful. Well, I look forward to that 1956 novel of adolescence. No, I
I'd
mean,
like to come on the air with you and we'll discuss it then.
how many years is that, Vincent?
12 years off, that's all. We will just finish our 22nd birthday party in Madison Square Garden and the Yankee Stadium and a few other places.
We're going to have Yankee Stadium and other places for annexes next time. So we invite you to be a guest. How's the Mary Margaret McBride Rose doing?
I was delighted to find that the 6 which I planted last fall came through the winter excellently and are thriving.
Hardy country rose, that's what we are.
The only trouble is that, I hesitate to say this, but they were all labeled. I planted about 18 roses in a row. And somebody during the winter stole 3, and the ones they stole were not those labeled Mary Margaret McBride.
Well, I
A lot of the people down in Maine are very ignorant, you see.
Yes. I'm glad for you still to have your 6. But I do feel a little hurt and slighted all the same. But,
Well, it just goes to show that that's a rural district.
but you hurt me, too, about Maine. I thought Maine was the most honest place in the world. I didn't think anybody ever stole anything there, not even a rose.
Well, you know, when a person sees something they really want and can take it, the temptation is pretty severe.
Mm-hmm. Is this a personal remark?
No?
Huh?
No,
Just a
that's,
philosophical observation
yes.
on life.
Yes, you have to have a certain sense of social inhibitions to refrain from stealing when you have a chance.
Mm-hmm.
And if you live in a small town, those inhibitions are not always so strong.
What do you really
How do we get on these subjects?
No, now you've started me thinking about something. I often wrestle with myself on the subject of motives and what prompts you to be good occasionally and then suddenly break out and be just as bad as you can. Do you think it's just do you think that we're governed more by fear than anything else?
I think it's largely a question of digestion.
That so when your digestion's good, you just rip-roaring or as bad as you can be. When your digestion is bad, you feel you're about to meet your maker, and so you don't.
No, I think the converse is true.
You do?
When your digestion is bad, you come home and kick the cat.
Well, that may be.
When your digestion is good, you behave yourself. But when your digestion is bad, you seek release in some way.
No, I disagree with you. I don't believe that people with bad digestions go out and steal.
Oh, but they misbehave in other ways.
Yes, they're cross and cranky and crabbed, which is perhaps worse.
Worse, much worse.
Are you advocating stealing above being cross?
Well, I'm an expert at both, so I don't think we'd better go into that.
One of these days, he will really stop coming on my air. He will begin to think that he commits himself too far. You're awfully cagey, though. What do you suppose makes you so cagey?
Years of experience.
Mm-hmm. Would you be as cagey if, say, Vincent were asking you questions, do you think?
I wouldn't answer any questions anybody asked me except you.
Yeah, that gives you a sense of achievement, Mary Margaret. You've done better than anybody else could have.
Well, I think, Vincent, with that, we'll just remind everybody that this guest today is Ben Ames Williams. Williams, just the way you'd expect it to be spelled, Williams. And his latest book is Leave Her to Heaven. And The Strange Woman, as I remember, is still a bestseller. After 3 or 4 years, isn't it?
Yes.
Well, she's so diabolical. And Ellen is just as diabolical. I just feel that I want really to tell them what happened to Ellen, and since you don't remember, I might as well, but I won't.
Well, I feel I want to tell them this is station WEAF New York, to which they are listening.
And
Also to mention the fact that we're going out to Morristown, New Jersey next Tuesday afternoon to do our 1 o'clock broadcast from there. We're broadcasting from the Historical Museum at Morristown. Admission to the broadcast is by ticket, and the tickets may be obtained from the Chief of Police, of Morristown, who will have the tickets available for you any time of the morning, afternoon, or evening.
Therefore, we'll be sure to have in our audience only people with good digestions, because nobody else will go near the police
I
department.
guess that's right. You can get your tickets starting Thursday morning. It's tomorrow morning, and we suggest that you get there early to ask for tickets.
Mm-hmm. You seem to know more about it than I do, Mr. Conley.
Well, I just found it out within the last 5 minutes, so I can't lay any great claim to knowledge.
I thought we ought to be very serious about our sponsors today. It seems so long since I've talked about them, doesn't it to you?
Yes, we kind of glossed them over lightly there for a few days.
You see, I really love my sponsors. I really think they're wonderful people, wonderful products. I appreciate more than anything in the world that's ever happened to me the letters that have come during our 10th anniversary celebration, where you all said, as a birthday present to you, Mary Margaret, I went out and bought every single product of yours that I could get. And not only did I buy it now, but I always buy it and buy them, and I'm going to keep replenishing my supply. Now, that's really wonderful. And then you added the thing that makes me even happier. You said, you know why? Not just because we're fond of you and Vincent, but because when you recommend a product, it always turns out to be just the way you said it would be. So.
You couldn't ask for anything more than that, could you?
You take the Bohack stores. Mrs. Huberkamp wins $5 worth of Bohack merchandise today, writing from Bayshore, Long Island, about the Bohack stores. Her fourth son may be in Italy. Not in Italy, but in France right now. I don't know where he is, but he's overseas somewhere. And she is taking care of the 4 children of another son who is doing war work at a distant place, and his wife is with him. Well, she was a listener to our program, but there was no Bohacks near her. She was very dissatisfied with the store where she was buying, so she decided to find the Bohacks if it killed her. And she said, believe me, I'm glad I went exploring. Such a variety of all my favorite brands, fresh vegetables, delicious meats, courteous, helpful clerks, store roomy and clean, and all under one roof at no extra cost. It seems like fiction. Dealing there is ample reward for the extra walk, and I'm looking forward to taking my daughter there when she comes home. I guess it's her son-in-law who's doing war work. I bought most of your products there. Smith's split peas. Say, by the way, Vincent, the other night when we were dining with the Auslanders, Joseph Auslander, the poet, his wife eats soup last.
She does.
She eats up her meal, and then she orders soup.
Very attractive woman otherwise.
Beautiful woman. Wonderful poet. Don't you think that's a good idea?
I'm not sure.
She just does not want a sweet, and so she has soup.
Well?
And I thought, why, there's Smith's 3-minute mix. You see, you could decide that you just had to have soup when you'd finished your meal, and it only takes 3 minutes to do the 3-minute mix. And it has that wonderful split pea flavor, Smith's split pea. Remember me telling you how Smith's split peas are grown in a special part of the United States? They're in the Northwest, so they get a special rain and special climate. And they're different, that's all. They're like all my products, just different. And this 3-minute mix has a different flavor. Oh, well, then Mrs. Huberkamp says that she has dromedary. That's the mix, that you take out of the package. Say you want to make cupcakes. You mix a cup of water with it, and then you just pour it into cupcake pans after you've mixed it. And you don't have to put in any spices, sugar, shortening, anything. Dromedary is well, it's Mary Washington's own recipe. She was the mother of George Washington.
She certainly was.
Mm-hmm. And Sweetheart soap, Mrs. Huberkamp says that's that fragrant oval cake that doesn't waste away and is so economical, makes a wonderful lather, is good for even the most fragile baby skin. Did you ever try it for shampoos? Good for that, too. Says she got Noxon at Bohack's. I wasn't sure about that. That's the creamy liquid that you use on your silver services. Well, and I got the most beautiful silver spoon, Vincent, from a listener. It was her great-grandmother's. It's thin and worn, and I'll use Noxon on it without any fear because it will not scratch, and you just rub it on, rub it off, and the whole thing's done. She got Hemo there, too. That's Borden's Hemo, else to the cow and Borden's Hemo. Well, that has vitamins A, B1, B2, D, niacin, and minerals, iron, phosphorus,
and calcium.
He just loves that. He loves to get in a mineral. And it's a chocolatey drink, this Hemo, H-E-M-O. It's a chocolatey drink, and you enjoy drinking your vitamins and minerals. That's really good, And she says, Van Camp's. But the other night I cooked Goodman's egg noodles with cheese for the children. I wish you could have seen them eat. Tommy had 4 helpings, and then he said, gee, Gran, we certainly have swell things to eat. I'm glad you found that new store. That's Bohack, by the way.
Mm-hmm. That's Bohack's. Do you have a Bohack special, or is this the wrong day for it?
Florida Valencia oranges, extra large and juicy, 5 pounds for 35 cents. Florida Valencia oranges tomorrow at all Bohack stores. She didn't put in Fannie Farmer, did she?
No, she didn't.
Well, the Fannie Farmer people are still asking us to save paper. There are 700,000 different items being shipped to the Army that are wrapped or boxed in paper. That means the demand for paper has increased enormously. So when you buy Fannie Farmer old-time candies, those luscious, creamy, rich candies that still have the same quality, though you can't get as many of them, and you buy Salto nut meats in the Fannie Farmer shops, save paper and buy war stamps and do all the other things that you ought to do, that it's your duty to do. And here's Fleischer Yarns. I like to be very serious about Fleischer yarns. Now, there's some more integrity. 77 years those Fleischer people have been making the very best yarns, testing them, trying them, making them so that you can knit sweaters, knit lovely, soft, downy little things for babies. Generations have had Fleischer things. And your favorite needlework counter would have books that are illustrated and all the Fleischer yarns and all the directions and all the tools for using them. Vincent has a Fleischer sweater.
I have. I'm very proud of it, too.
People wrote that they were certainly glad to realize it wasn't a myth when I held it up, but they were disappointed you didn't wear it.
Yes. Well, it was a little warm in there, I felt.
I wish we could have had sandwiches of enriched tip-top bread for everybody there. Wouldn't that have been wonderful?
It would have been nice.
You could have handed out peanut butter, and I'd have handed out mashed-up ham. Not
To
mashed
put on
up
the sandwich, on the bread.
Yeah, with pickle.
Mhm.
And I'd have had enriched tip-top bread with all the vitamins and minerals, and that wonderful crust and the flavor. Really an awfully good bread, enriched tip-top bread. It's a new loaf that our enriched tip-top people made, especially when we went to war, because they wanted to put more nourishment. They wanted to put more vitamins, more minerals, more everything. Some of you did compare it with other loaves, and you've written me that you like it a lot better, and those of you who didn't, I'll be glad to hear from you. What's the matter, Vincent? You want Onco?
Yes, I was just...
Say, do you think Gimbals have Onco?
I'm not certain. I believe they have.
They put us in an advertisement.
Did they?
Wasn't that nice?
Mhm.
About our birthday party. Right into their ads in the New York papers, they put us.
That was very nice of them, indeed.
They're sweet. Well, anyhow, they ought to have Onco because it's 100% Carnauba wax. You know what that is? That's that palm tree that gives off on its leaf this wax. It's the hardest wax you ever... I haven't read Mr. Hewitt's letter.
No, you haven't
And I
been
keep
promising
saying
for a long
nobody
time.
in the world would ever buy anything for floors or furniture except ONCO if I ever read Mr. Hewitt's letter, because he is this laboratory and he tested it, and he's very honest. He's Peter Cooper's grandson. Very... Ben Ames Williams is laughing at me. Why do people laugh at me?
I can't understand it.
You're wonderful.
M.J. Freed in Chester, Pennsylvania is carrying Onco, and Russell E. Smith in Millville, New Jersey is carrying Onco.
You haven't said a word about Bulldog Blue or Dazzle.
Neither of you.
Well,
What do you want to say about them?
Well, Bulldog Blue is our liquid... I bet Ben Ames Williams remembers about it. The Bulldog's picture on the front. I think we said something about Yale, where you didn't go, did you? But it's a liquid concentrated bluing that goes a long, long way.
Mm-hmm.
And then Dazzle is a bleach. And everybody needs a bleach. And we buy our Dazzle in the quart-size bottle.
Why?
Well, because it's more economical.
That's right.
And if your dealer doesn't have Bulldog Blue, would you please write me his name and address as a very extra special? Say, I went to a wedding yesterday, 2 days ahead of time up at West Point.
Well, you went to the pet show 10 days ahead of time, so you're getting closer all the time.
Yeah, Thursday, General Omar Bradley's daughter, whose mother is an old school friend of mine, is getting married. But I went yesterday.
It was just announced today that General Bradley is in France, you know.
I know.
Mhm.
Oh, and that woman, my friend Mary Bradley, is a brave, fine woman. Here's her only child, just getting married to a West Point graduate, who will have 1 month of holiday, and then he's geared for war. And there's her husband, General. I'm going to have her on the program. Mary
That would be
Bradley,
fine.
don't you think so?
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to tell Vincent. Let me tell about all the brides that were up there, and the rice at the Thayer Hotel, and the little shops just full of wedding cakes, and the florists just sending out one bridal bouquet after another. You know, they marry them at the rate of about one every 5 minutes.
Have you finished now?
And I went to a wedding after all, Vincent.
Mary Margaret McBride will be back again tomorrow afternoon at 1 o'clock. This is Vincent Connolly speaking.
Mary Margaret McBride's program is a WEAF feature presentation.
(1:45 p.m. Eastern War Time). WEAF, New York. The National Broadcasting Company presents Morgan Beatty, NBC military analyst and Washington reporter, in a continuation of NBC's invasion news coverage. Today, Mr. Beatty gives you the latest news of the invasion and an analysis of the war to this minute, direct from our microphone at the War Department in Washington's big Pentagon building. And now, Mr. Beatty.
This is Morgan Beatty speaking from the Pentagon in Washington. I'll be back in a moment with news of the day.
Meanwhile, please listen to the following announcement, an important message for every man and woman in New York City. Here's a way to get real value from a $1 bill. Just enroll as an associate member in New York City's Police Athletic League, and that dollar will be put right to work, giving many healthful, wholesome hours of recreation to a boy or girl in one of the crowded sections of town. Enroll at your neighborhood police station or send $1 to Police Headquarters, 240 Center Street, New York 13. Now back to Morgan Beatty in Washington.
Nor does he know whether this is the main attack on Fortress Europe from the west. The Supreme Command in Britain has achieved almost a miracle of planning on news. In front of us today are scores of dispatches from reporters who've gone through the fire of landing operations. Also, there are reports based on the briefing of correspondents at Supreme Headquarters, General Eisenhower's headquarters somewhere in Britain. The correspondents there, from the tone of their dispatches and the blank spaces, you can almost sense are unable, for reasons of security, to give us a clear picture as yet. That's why I say the High Command has achieved almost a miracle on the news front. We've got plenty of facts to go on. There's plenty of material for you and I to mull over, but it gives us no pattern to show just how the Allied battle plan is shaping up. I thought it wise to admit as much to you today so you would understand. As a matter of fact, we've just now got a bulletin a few moments ago from Zurich in Switzerland. It says that unconfirmed reports from Nazi-occupied Milan in Italy said today that a large Allied fleet has been sighted off Genoa, and a landing on the Ligurian coast of northwestern Italy is expected hourly. Milan is about 300 miles north of Rome in another part of the European theater. But we must remember, these are Nazi reports. From what has come through from Allied headquarters, however, in Britain, we can begin to grasp the magnitude, the size of the operation in Europe, and tell why our initial landings were successful, why it's possible to reinforce the beachheads of northern France. The weight of Allied attack at the beachheads, the combined weight of naval power and air power, was too great for successful enemy counteraction, whether he had tried it or not. Accurate battle figures tell the story. More than 900 aerial transports alone were used in the opening blows. The invasion air fleet, 9 planes wide and 200 miles long, plowed across the channel today, and another air train with gliders tacked on behind, a train 50 miles long, poured in reinforcements. On the first invasion day alone, 13,000 flights were made by Allied planes from British bases. The Germans must have been able to figure fairly closely in advance on the size of this initial thrust at them from the air. They must have known that back in Britain, thousands more planes were ready to pounce on the Luftwaffe in case it should try at the outset to maul our glider forces. Therefore, the enemy held back his fire, held back his reserves in the air. He used only local air attacks from what we might call the crust of air defense along the coast. True, we may have knocked out many of their airfields in recent weeks, too, but whatever the cause, we lost only 70 aircraft on the first invasion wave, 12 of them troop carriers, 12 of them gliders carrying troops. But you might well ask, where were all those guns on the invasion coast? Why didn't they mow down the men? Here's where we should be most cautious. Some reports by returning correspondents, some reports from headquarters indicate that those coastal guns at some points did go into action. Some of our beachheads were apparently held up for some time, but many more of our beachheads did succeed, and while losses were not what they were expected to be, it is still important that there's no report on these losses as yet, presumably because we do not want the enemy to know how successful his coastal defense system, his west wall, has proved. But the main reason why the enemy's coastal defense system didn't work out so well is this, and what I report to you now you may have heard before today, but it seems to me to be the most significant fact of invasion yet released. The 4,000 warships that carried the initial landing forces across the channel poured 2,000 tons of shells at specific targets on shore every 10 minutes. 2,000 tons of shells every 10 minutes during the landing operations in a 60-mile stretch between Cherbourg on the Normandy Peninsula and Le Havre, the port city lying in between the Normandy Peninsula at other French port in the north and Brittany in the other peninsula. In view of the fact that a battleship, there were 6 Allied battleships operating hot guns in the close quarters of the channel the other night, but in view of the fact that one battleship alone can pour out vastly more firepower, more accurately, than most air fleets yet used in warfare, in view of that, it's understandable that much of the enemy's responding fire from the shore was silenced when the initial landing parties dashed ashore. So the enemy's coastal defense zone, the great fortified, mine-trapped, tank-barriered zone, the defense he had counted on to hold us until he could tell the direction of our attack and its magnitude, that coastal defense strip failed him in the pinch. And that the latest news tells us Allied troops have struck inland in France in heavy fighting, and the first Nazi counter-blow near Caen, 20 miles inland, has been successfully repulsed by our forces. At the same time, the latest reports also tell us that the enemy has now been cleared from all our landing beaches, and some of the beachheads have been linked up. That is, the fighting forces have pushed forward and fanned outward to join hands with landing parties a few miles down the coast. Reports from the Cherbourg Peninsula area at the tip of Normandy, another critical point of fighting, show a decided improvement at dusk today, that is, dusk European time. These reports indicate the Allies are making considerable progress along the whole front in between Caen and Cherbourg, despite bad weather and stiffening German resistance. You see, our landing parties are now trying desperately not only to link hands with each other, but they are working to attain certain objectives in the rear where our airborne divisions, and the Germans say we've landed 6 such divisions further back, or about 25,000 men, where our airborne divisions are holding off the enemy. Together, the combat teams that landed in boats and the airborne divisions landing further back by air are trying to create a huge beachhead to make a complete strip of Allied territory, perhaps 20 miles deep, and extending along the coast some 60 miles between Cherbourg at the tip of the peninsula and Caen. So much for the actual operations of northern France. But is this the main operation? And why was this particular area chosen for the first attack? We do not have official answers to these questions, but geography and the Allied main objectives in the Western invasion help us towards sketchy answers. The Allies have chosen as their first landing point or area in Western Europe a strip of French coast that is almost the farthest distance from Berlin of any in Western France. But it is not quite the farthest. Brittany would be a little farther west. But why was this strip of coast chosen? It's quite clear now that the heavy fighting around Caen, near Le Havre, answers this question. That's where, we were told a short while ago, the Germans have chosen to strike back with their Mobile reserves. Not their main reserves, but the Mobile forces held ready to back up the coastal defense system, the system that failed the Germans. Caen controls the railroads and highways in between the two peninsulas of northern France, so that it's possible from that point to fan out and cut off the peninsula of Normandy from the rest of France. The base of the peninsula, you know, is only about 60 miles wide, so that if our forces can hold Caen and spread out from Cherbourg, we will have achieved a huge beachhead against the enemy, a beachhead into which we can pour troops enough to stick. We who are not military men should keep in mind that in warfare, the flanks are the weakest positions of any army or fighting force, and it's only possible to use so many soldiers, so much fighting equipment on a given battle line. Now, if we, the Allies, should gain the Normandy Peninsula, our tremendously superior naval gun power can protect the flanks of a line across the base of the peninsula where it joins onto the main geography of France. Our tremendously superior air power can prevent the Germans from striking back successfully. In other words, our fighters and bombers and transports will be in control of the air. Thus, the advantages of the Allied forces at this moment in the beachhead area, as our superior air and sea power, these advantages are being used for all their work. This means that as the fighting goes on, the infantry soldiers and the artillerymen, the fighting ground forces who must stick, will not have to worry seriously about their flanks on each side of them or on the air above them. They will have one job to do, a very difficult job and a costly job, because they will not have as great a force as the enemy can pour in, the job of sticking on a battle line 60 miles long. As we've noted before, only so many soldiers can be used on a given line, and a 60-mile-long line is not a wide battlefront. So, if we can only pour in the maximum number of men that can operate on a 60-mile line, the Germans' one superiority, his superiority on land, will be neutralized in this particular battle area. Thus, we'll be on an even footing with the enemy on the ground and superior on the flanks, that is, on the sea and in the air. It's fairly clear that this is the Allied plan for this particular invasion coast area. Now, let's go back to yesterday afternoon in the White House, where the President held his first post-invasion conference with newsmen, when he was cautioning us against overconfidence at this point. He used one sentence that sticks in my mind. He said, "The war's not over. This operation's not over. It's continuing." At this point, it's obvious Allied strategy to indicate to the Germans that this is only the beginning, that warfare is continuing, and the Germans themselves, of course, are very sensitive on this point. The fact that they give us, through Zurich, a bulletin reporting Allied fleets off Milan, north of Rome, indicates that they're fishing for information. The reason for this strategic purpose of silence about our planning is clear. We wish to prevent the Germans from knowing whether any more landings are coming and where they may be coming. If the enemy does not know, he can afford to risk sending very few reserves to the present fighting front, and our men will have to face less firepower, fewer bullets. That's why the German radio is constantly reporting further Allied activity. Activity like that reported from Zurich, and activity like that off the shores of France, opposite Dover. They are reporting landings in that area in a guarded, sometimes garbled sort of way. They're fishing, again, for information which they will never get. So up to this moment, the main battle of Europe is the battle for the Normandy or Cherbourg Peninsula. The major fighting is at 2 points. Caen, where our forces hope to pry that peninsula, in a sense, away from the geography of the rest of France and use it as a base for further attacks. The other main point of fighting is in the neighborhood of Cherbourg, because Cherbourg is a fairly large port, a port that can absorb heavy reinforcements, big guns, thousands of soldiers per day, many thousands more than we could land with full equipment any other way. And that's the story of invasion up to this moment. And now for a few last-minute bulletins. The Russian newspaper Red Star says the Red Army is poised for attacks on the eastern front against the enemy. This is obviously devised to prevent the Germans from releasing any more forces on the Russian front to face us in the west. That's very encouraging, this report in the Red Star. The Russians, you know, are only now beginning to realize the tremendous difference in land warfare and amphibious warfare. Their newspapers this morning are printing pictures of landing craft, those strange ships that literally vomit men and guns on the beachheads. It's the first sight many a Russian ever had of this kind of fighting machine. And here in Washington, we're getting all sorts of news today that hasn't been cleared up in recent days because of the invasion to come. News, some of it very important relatively, but of very little importance now that invasion has actually developed. For example, Chairman David Walsh of the Senate Naval Affairs Committee today confirms that we have, as I reported to you exclusively some time ago, sent an American light cruiser to Russia. But he says the ships were leased to the Russians. It still belongs to the United States. And then we have, as a few last-minute bulletins, Chairman Donald Nelson of the War Production Board reports today that he believes an expansionist economy sparked by private enterprise should develop after the war. That's all for now, and thank you. I'll be back at this same time tomorrow.
Ladies and gentlemen, around the world capitals and in our New York newsroom, NBC is standing by for new developments on the invasion. General Eisenhower's headquarters overseas has established the release hour of communiques at 11:30 p.m. British time, which is 5:30 in the late afternoon in New York. We suggest you tune to NBC around that hour each evening. The morning communique is released at about 5 o'clock in the morning, New York time, and the NBC newsroom's early morning broadcasts give coverage to that communique. At 3:45 this afternoon, NBC brings you a special 15-minute summary by the noted news analyst H.V. Kaltenborn over station WEAF. In the meantime, any important bulletins on the war reaching our newsroom will be put on the air immediately, interrupting any of our scheduled programs. NBC is now returned to normal programming, but the news of the invasion still has the right of way over all else. Morgan Beatty's news report from Washington is heard each day at this time, 1:45 over station WEAF. This is the National Broadcasting Company.
The future of the world hangs on the outcome of the final struggle between the Allies and Nazi Germany. NBC will provide complete news coverage of the invasion. Stay tuned to WEAF, New York.
This is Ed Prentice, your host, welcoming you to the General Mills Hour, the living, breathing reenactment of the day-by-day activities of typical American people. We bring you what we believe to be the finest entertainment, drama and humor, and a philosophy that you and I can use in the important business of living. Dramatize problems that concern us in our relationship with our families, our communities, our nation. On the guiding light, you will hear Dr. Gaylord tell an assembly of his neighbors what D-Day means to the melting pot community of 5 Points. Today's children, the young people, men and women facing a world at war. The Woman in White, with its story of nurses, our need of them now and in a post-war world. The General Mills Hour, an hour of fine entertainment. The Guiding Light. The Guiding Light, brought to you by General Mills, creators of new foods and new ideas for a better world. Today, as the fate of the war hangs on the invasion, there should be just 2 kinds of Americans, those who fight and those who back up the invasion. Now, how can we best back our fighting men? By producing the weapons they need, and by furnishing the money to buy these materials of war. In other words, we must bend our every effort on the production front, and we must buy more and more war bonds. We're not being asked to give our money to back up the invasion. No. We're being asked simply to lend it, and at a nice profit. Now, how can any of us at a time like this turn down such a request from our government? We must figure out how to buy more bonds. Families whose wage earners buy bonds through the payroll savings plan should figure out how to increase their war bond purchases. Others who buy bonds direct should plan ways and means of buying extra bonds now. Get your money into the fight. Buy more war bonds now. And now, the Guiding Light. At the little church in 5 Points, a special meeting has been called by the Reverend Mr. Gaylord to commemorate the event which everyone in America today is talking about, the Allied invasion of Europe. For the past half hour, the church has been gradually filling with the people of the melting pot community. People of many different faiths and nationalities who tonight, more than ever, are united by their common bond of Americanism. The church now is packed. As the minister approaches the pulpit, he notices with satisfaction that there is quite a sprinkling of servicemen in his audience. Some of them men home on furlough. Others, like Jacob Kransky,
discharged veterans of World War II. Perhaps, thinks Mr. Gaylord, the presence of these uniformed men will help to bring home the significance of what he's going to say.
Friends and neighbors of 5 Points, you've heard, all of you, the thrilling news which the radio and newspapers have been bringing us since early yesterday morning. The great battle to free Europe and destroy once and for all the power of its cruel oppressors has been joined at last. It is a time of glorious and momentous meaning for all of us. A time, surely, that we at home can best observe, indeed consecrate, by determining to do everything in our power to speed the day of victory. It is clear to all of us, I think, that we and our allies are now entering the final decisive phase of the war, so far as Europe is concerned. The struggle may be hard, may be long. The price of triumph, we can be sure, won't be cheap. The enemy has been hoarding his strength for the test of power that lies ahead. He'll use every ounce of that strength in a desperate last-ditch attempt to avoid defeat. But let us never forget that we, you and I, in our own community, can hasten the day when our boys, the laurel of victory won, will come marching home. With that thought in mind, let us gladly bear our share of the burden. A share that is so very light in comparison with that being borne by our armed forces. I know that for some of us, those who are unable to make a direct contribution by doing essential war work, the opportunities for aiding the men in the front lines may seem limited, insignificant. But let us not underestimate the importance of the small tasks we're given to do, the small sacrifices we are asked to make. Let us, by all means, cultivate our victory gardens, save our waste kitchen fats, buy as many war stamps and bonds as we can, and take a conscientious part in voluntary war activities. For these things, too, will hasten that day of joyous reunion with our fighting men, to which we all look forward. I know how many of you have sons, brothers, husbands, sweethearts overseas, some of whom undoubtedly are now seeing action for the first time. I know what a burden their absence places on your heart. How much you miss them, long to have them back with you in your home. And I know, too, how doubly great is the yearning of our soldiers, sailors, and Marines themselves to return to their homes and families, to the familiar scenes and pleasant occupations from which they were called in the line of duty. Their thoughts are of you, of your love, of 5 Points, of their job, the corner drugstore, baseball game. All those sentiments, privileges, comforts, and pastimes, the big and the little things, which make up our American way of life. It is these things they are fighting for. These things their valor is preserving. These things which will be their reward when the smoke of battle has cleared and the light of peace again breaks over the world. It is almost 4 years since the Nazi peril to the hopes of free men reached its peak of ruthlessness and violence. Our military fortunes are now in the balance. Let us not yet take victory for granted and assume that right, truth, decency will automatically prevail. Our young men at the front know differently. They know the price of freedom, and they are paying it unflinchingly. Let us give them our help when that help is most vital. They must, they can, and will win. But in a large degree, it is up to us to decide when and at what cost. The critical days of the war lie ahead. We've arrived at the beginning of the end. Let us make that end swift and certain. Let's go all out for the boys. Let's bring them home. And now, will you join me in prayer? Our Father in heaven, whence cometh our strength in battle, we pray thee to bless our arms in the struggle now beginning. Let thy ever-watchful presence comfort and protect our loved ones in the shock and stress of conflict. Give us at home the will to bear with unwavering devotion our share of the war's burden. And may those who are bereaved in the days to come find refuge in thy bounteous mercy. Be thou, O Lord, our sword and our shield. Amen.
You are listening to The Guiding Light. What can we do to back the invasion? Well, we can all buy United States war bonds. Buy them as we've never bought them before. Tonight, why don't you kind of hold a family council and see if you can't find ways and means of increasing that war bond allotment through the payroll savings plan. And buy extra bonds when you can. Remember, when our servicemen are doing so much, this is the least we can do to back them up. Get your money into the fight. Buy more war bonds now. And now, your host again, Ed Prentice.
Thank you, Gene. As the people of 5 Points file slowly out of the little church, the challenging words of the Reverend Mr. Gaylord fresh in their minds, they take with them an added consciousness of their privilege in being Americans and a new resolution to prove themselves worthy of that privilege. Now, I know that all of you have been following the trial of the People versus Bertha Ship. The trial in which a young girl is being tried for the murder of Tom Leeming, a wealthy young man about town. Tom Leeming, with whom, as you know, Bertha was in love. Now, as you followed the testimony of the witnesses called by Pete Mano, the Special Assistant State's Attorney, and in John Murray's cross-examination, we've heard established the fact that Bertha was in Leeming's apartment on the night of the murder. Now, in just a few seconds, you'll hear a very startling statement made by Bertha Schultz in the office of her attorney, John Murray. A startling statement by one of today's children.
Today's Children, brought to you by Bisquick. They come rather often in June, warm, golden days when you feel you have to spend more time outdoors. Well, why not? Cut corners here and there. Your housework will always wait for you, and get meals as quickly and easily as possible. Which, to my way of thinking, means relying on Bisquick. Yes, Bisquick can save you plenty of time and work fixing good things to eat. For instance, the fluffy hot biscuits that glorify a simple pickup meal. You make them just by adding milk to Bisquick. Or you can have a pancake supper. A supper that features real old-time egg pancake. Light and tender and creamy smooth. Bisquick gives you your dry ingredients, blended just right. For delicious pancakes, you just add eggs, milk, and butter, or other fat to Bisquick. Almost nothing to it. And you get some of the eatinest pancakes ever. Now, there are a lot of other good things you can make in jig time with Bisquick. Shortcakes and cobblers, waffles, muffins, dumplings. Streamlined directions right on the Bisquick package. These June days, give yourself extra time off with Bisquick. Now, today's children. Ladies and gentlemen, the trial of the state versus Bertha Schultz continues. You are all invited to come and witness this exciting trial in action. All you have to do is write a letter or card to Today's Children, NBC, Chicago 54, and tickets will be sent to you immediately. There are a few seats available for the broadcast of June 15th, 16th, and 19th. Come and meet in person Marilyn, Bertha, John Murray, Pete Mano, and other members of the cast. Everyone who has attended the trial of Bertha Schultz has so thoroughly enjoyed being present and meeting the cast. And we think that you won't want to miss the chance of seeing this interesting broadcast. So write today for your tickets for June 15th, 16th, and 19th. Write to Today's Children, NBC, Chicago 54, and admission tickets will be sent to you. NBC Chicago Studios is the only place where the trial may be witnessed. And now, Today's Children.
What's the matter with you, Bertha? What's wrong with you? I'm your attorney. Don't you realize that? This business of keeping things from me, things that I've got to know, I just don't know what to call it. I just don't know what to think of.
Words spoken by John Murray as he paces back and forth in his office early this afternoon. Words directed at the young woman he is defending, trying to defend against a charge of murder. Words that are a result of the cumulative strain imposed upon the young attorney through day after day of the trial, particularly the last session of court, which saw John draw a rebuke from the judge for going out of bounds in cross-examining a witness. Anger, resentment, and actual frustration underlines the words with which John Murray plays his young client. And for Mama Schultz, who sits next to Bertha in John's office this afternoon. For Mama Schultz, whose sagging shoulders and nervously working hands betray her anxiety. It's as though she felt the impact of John's words even more than her daughter does.
I'm your attorney. Don't you realize that? What's the matter with you, Bertha?
I'm sorry, John. Believe me, I am.
Don't you realize the importance of this case?
Of course I do. I'm on trial, John. Important.
Then why haven't you told me everything?
Well, I thought I had. I tried to remember everything. I guess I just forgot.
Forgot? You mean, Bertha, that you've been able to forget anything that happened that night?
So many things happened.
Yes, that's just it.
I was also mixed up.
I know. But if it was mixed up for you, think of how much more mixed up it is for someone trying to piece together your story with incomplete information.
John, I don't
Bertha's
know. I've
been trying to do what's right, John. It ain't her fault. It ain't that she hasn't been trying to remember everything to tell you. Everything.
But, Mama Schultz, the fact remains that I haven't been given the facts. Now, how can I possibly prepare a defense unless I know the whole story? The complete story. How can I possibly cross-examine witnesses when at the last minute they bring out testimony that takes the wind right out of my sails?
Yeah, I know.
Now, that man who testified for the state. Bertha, I asked you time and again to account for those hours between the time you left the park and the time you arrived home. Do you mean to tell me you don't remember having a cup of coffee with this man? That you completely forgot his dropping you off at a picture show?
That didn't seem important at the time, John. There were so many other things to explain, to account for. Besides, I didn't know who the man was. Had no idea I'd ever see him again. Neither did you. How could I know he was a policeman? I just couldn't know.
That's just it, Bertha. That's why I've got to know everything. I can't wait till the state puts witnesses on the stand to fill out your story form. I've got to be prepared in advance.
That's right, Bertha. We know that, John. Ain't that why we are here?
I should have had everything straight before this trial began. Why, we can't afford another day in court like this one.
I've told you I'm terribly sorry, John. I know how you felt when the judge said all those things.
No, that's all beside the point. My feelings don't count. It's you I'm thinking of, Bertha. If you'd only try to believe it. Don't you trust me? Don't you want to confide in me? Are you afraid of me?
Afraid? Why, no, of course not. But you know everything now.
I wonder.
John, please.
Now, Lily. You mustn't. Just listen and answer everything like John says.
What more can I tell you? Haven't I been through it over and over? Everything. How I went to the hotel last night, up to Tom's apartment. How I saw him lying there. How I lost my head and ran. How I went into the park.
All right, Bertha, all right.
Naturally, I can't remember every little detail.
Having a cup of coffee with a stranger, going to a movie was more than just a detail. What other tiny details have you forgotten?
None, John. I swear it.
I wish I could be sure. I wish I could really be sure there are no other strange lapses in memory.
What do you mean by that?
Bertha.
I'll let you be the judge of that.
Don't you think I've told you the truth?
You haven't told me the facts.
That isn't what you mean, is it, John? What you mean is You don't believe in me.
No, I didn't say that.
But I know it. You don't believe in me. Nobody does.
Oh, Liebling.
Perhaps you don't want to go on with the trial, John.
Now, Bertha.
You don't have to, you know. Nothing's holding you.
Don't talk like that, Bertha.
We've got to talk about it. If John doesn't feel he wants to...
I've no
then
intention of stepping out, Bertha.
You're sure of that?
Don't worry. I'm seeing this through.
You don't have to. No reason why you should feel obligated.
Bertha, I'm just trying to
Oh,
tell
yes,
you.
I know. You're trying to believe I'm innocent, but somehow you can't.
Will you stop, please?
Stop. Yes, why not stop everything? What's the use of my pleading innocence? What's the use of your even trying to defend me if you think I'm guilty? Why go on? Maybe I am guilty.
What did you say, Bertha? Maybe you are guilty. What do you mean by that? The question remains unanswered as John Murray looks at his client. There is silence in the heavily paneled office. Oppressive silence. Significant silence.
You are listening to Today's Children. Is your husband muffin-minded? A lot of men are, I know. So remember how easy it is to make wonderful muffins with Bisquick. No sifting of dry ingredients. No trying to keep your place in a recipe book. You just add milk, an egg, and a touch of sugar to Bisquick, according to the simple directions on the package. Yes, that's all you do to stir up muffins that men go for with loud yelps of glee. Can't you picture these muffins? Big, puffy, amber-crusted muffins, brought to the table piping hot. Friend husband grabs one quick, pops it open. It's all golden and feather-light inside. He puts on butter, which gets all melty, piles on luscious fruity jam, and is a very happy man indeed. Look, remember what muffins can do for a meal, won't you? Also, what Bisquick can do for muffins. Now, here again is your General Mills host, Ed Prentice.
Thank you, Gordon. Say, you heard Bertha Schultz's statement to John Murray. Maybe I am guilty. That's what she said. If I remember correctly, today wasn't the first time she made that remark. And it set me wondering. You know, I've followed this case just as closely as you have, and I thought from time to time that perhaps this girl was being tried on a charge of which she was innocent, but I don't know. More and more I have the feeling that she might be guilty. I understand when the court convenes tomorrow, Pete Mono is bringing to the witness stand a young woman who was also present in Tom Leaming's apartment on the night of the attack, Josie Forrester. I'm going to be on hand, and I'm sure you will be, too. For anything can happen. Well, we pause briefly for station identification.
Continuing its up-to-the-minute coverage of the invasion, CBS World News now presents 15 minutes of news and analysis. First, a summary of the latest developments by Ned Calmer, followed by an analysis by Quincy Howell. Mr. Calmer.
At a solemn moment in our national history, President Roosevelt has led the American people in prayer for the fighting men who tonight are entering the second day of their invasion on the Normandy coast of France. The President also brought us, less than an hour ago, the latest word on military operations. Thus far, he said, they have been successful. Meantime, the first of the Allied wounded are returning to Britain, and the thoughts of the whole civilized world are with them, and with their comrades who are still in the midst of the fight. It's now more than 24 hours since our invasion got underway, and it's a good moment to look back over the welter of millions of words that have poured in on us to see just what is clear and definite in the picture. There are only two trustworthy sources, the communiques from General Eisenhower's quarters, and the statements by Allied leaders, notably President Roosevelt and Prime Minister Churchill. The German communiques, though they may be misleading and exaggerated, must be taken into consideration at this stage of the invasion when so much is happening and so little is officially revealed by our side. Then there's the unending series of reports and rumors from neutral cities in Europe which may or may not be skillfully planted Nazi propaganda. They have to be sifted, and if they look probable, they ought to be mentioned. But first, what's disclosed officially by the Allies? The communique from Allied headquarters on the first day's operations says that our initial landings in northern France were successful. It says the fighting continues under command of General Montgomery, that our naval casualties have been very light, but it doesn't specify as to land casualties so far. Our planes, it says, continued operations in very great strength all day, and continuous fighter cover is being maintained over both our naval and land forces. The communique also reveals that 2 naval task forces launched assaults on France this morning, and they include the cruiser Augusta under Admiral Kirk and the cruiser Tuscaloosa under Admiral Dale. President Roosevelt gave his first report on the invasion by saying that operations are so far up to schedule. As of noon, American ship losses were 2 destroyers and 1 landing ship, he said, and aircraft losses about 1%. The battleship Nevada is in action. Mr. Churchill's reports are being given to the House of Commons, where he appeared twice today. It was Churchill who disclosed that Allied troops have penetrated 9.5 miles inland and have been fighting at the town of Caen, C-A-E-N, in Normandy. He seemed well pleased, even surprised, that our losses have been so slight up to now. But he warned that it's much too early to tell what course the battle may take in the coming days and weeks. Our troops have established lodgments, he said, on a broad front, and it appears we've achieved a tactical surprise. The Prime Minister called all these operations the most complicated and difficult which have ever occurred. Around Eisenhower's headquarters also, considerable optimism is reported, despite the fact that the weather on the Channel, which has been against us more than once in this war, is none too satisfactory at this hour. The weather element, it's now revealed, actually forced a postponement of the invasion by 24 hours. Originally, it was set by Eisenhower for the night of June 4 to 5. May or June are now known to have been the months selected for the invasion as long ago as the Turan Conference. German reconnaissance was also caught sound asleep. It wasn't until after our armada of ships was well on its way from Britain that an enemy channel patrol spotted our movements not long before dawn. Our troops started out on their fateful mission in a gay but determined mood. We know definitely also that we maintain air superiority, that 11,000 planes are backing our invasion, that our airborne and paratroop actions were successful and our losses in those planes small, and that about 4,000 Allied warships are supporting the landings and continuing to move reinforcements to the beachheads. But just where those beachheads are, other than the action in the Caen area mentioned by Mr. Churchill, has not been stated by the Allied command. To give official details on that would be to hand the Germans valuable information free. Our only detailed reports on this, however, come from the German High Command. It's generally accepted that we've put men ashore from landing craft at a number of points between the ports of Cherbourg and Le Havre, which we have shelled in the Baie de la Seine, where the Seine River empties into the channel. It's probable that our troops poured ashore on the vast white beaches of Deauville and its neighboring resorts, once so popular with Americans of the pre-war era. The German communique claims to have knocked out our airborne forces south of Le Havre and trapped our troops at the mouth of the River Orne. There's an enemy report of battling near Rouen. Very heavy fighting continues along a front estimated variously by the Nazis from 15 to 100 miles in length. Within the past few hours, the Nazis have been reporting imminent new landings by the Allies. They say a British-American naval squadron is standing off Cherbourg and expect action in the region of Dunkirk and Calais. And a rumor in Turkey says the Allies have landed in Greece. Absolutely no confirmation from our side. One remarkable fact among all these developments is the poor showing of the German Air Force, said to have put only about 50 planes in the air so far today, though Marshal Goering is quoted as saying, "We must repel the invasion even if it means the death of the Luftwaffe." But on this, as well as a great many other aspects of the invasion, we may know much more within the next 2 or 3 days. The European underground, obedient to its orders, has not yet risen in full strength. General Eisenhower, now directing operations from a trailer in England, will give the word. General de Gaulle may be in France soon. The other war fronts tonight are naturally out of the limelight, but in Europe they're going to become increasingly important as our vast three-way squeeze develops. In Russia, though the Red Army has not yet begun its expected offensive, American bombers and fighters made their first strike from bases in the Soviet Union, a raid on the German airfield at Galati in Romania. In Italy, where life in Rome is being swiftly returned to normal by the Allied military government, French troops have captured the road junction at Tivoli to the northeast of Rome, and the Fifth Army is pursuing the enemy to the north and west. In the war against Japan, our troops on Biak Island off New Guinea are now within 1.5 miles of Mokma airfield and increasing their pressure all the time. The Burma fighting goes well for the Allies, but in China, the Japs have now fought their way into the outskirts of Changsha. On D-Day, there was no wild rejoicing in our own country. President Roosevelt's prayer has exemplified the American reaction. Flag waving is at a minimum. Many communities are holding solemn meetings. Some festive events have been canceled. War workers everywhere kept on working. But all of us have felt, despite the gravity of the hour, a sense of relief that the waiting, at least, the long period of suspense, is over. In Dallas, Texas, by the way, the invasion already has its first namesake. Invasia May Renfrew was born to a trucker's wife as the sirens sounded. The invasion news has been coming in now for nearly 24 hours on a wave of world excitement which hasn't yet reached its crest. You may have been one of those who were listening to their radio shortly after 12:30 a.m. Eastern Wartime when the first bulletin broke. That was an Associated Press dispatch from London quoting the German radio as saying that the invasion of Western Europe had begun. At that moment, CBS News Director Paul White alerted his staff, although it wasn't until 3:32 a.m. that the news was officially confirmed by Allied headquarters. Until then, there was always the possibility that the Germans were perpetrating a hoax with the hope of smoking out the French underground. So the CBS staff stood by, keeping its network open and keeping its audience informed on what the enemy was saying. The first genuine tip-off came when the British radio told the Dutch that Le Havre was under bombardment. Meantime, the veteran CBS correspondent Bob Trout was giving listeners a running account of developments from our newsroom just outside this studio where I'm speaking now, carrying around a portable microphone as he went to the various news machines, bringing in the reports in ever-increasing tempo. The CBS military analyst, Major George Fielding Elliott, then joined our coverage from New York. And it was while Elliott and Trout were reporting from the newsroom that London gave us the first official communique from Eisenhower's headquarters, simply announcing that Allied forces with strong naval and air support had landed in northern France. Then the voice of Edward R. Murrow, chief of the CBS European staff, came on in London, and Quentin Reynolds joined the broadcasters here in New York. That's the world news picture as D-Day ends. But if you're interested in numerology, you might want to know that the European invasion started on the 6th hour of the 6th day of the 6th month, in curious contrast with the end of the last war, which ended on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month.
You've been listening to Ned Calmer in a summary of the news. Each night at the same time, CBS World News brings you an analysis of the latest news developments. Tonight, Quincy Howe.
This has been a day of action abroad, a day of talk, reflection, and emotion at home. You've heard by now all the essential known facts about the Allied landings in Western Europe. They boil down to this. Allied forces have carried out their first operations on schedule with surprisingly small losses. This news, brief as it is, has immediate significance for every country in the world. To the peoples of occupied Europe, it means that their hour of liberation draws near. But their hour of liberation is also their hour of trial. We shall presently learn the real strength of the underground resistance movement in France. General de Gaulle and the French Committee now have their opportunity to prove their claim to represent their country. The White House State Department policy of non-recognition now meets its practical test. The exiled governments, which we do recognize, also approach their testing time. What strength and following have any of the resistance groups in Europe mustered? To whom do these groups look for leadership? To exiled leaders or to people in their own ranks? How do they feel about the British and the Americans, about our political plans, our air bombardments, our blockade? Are the people of Europe ripe for revolution? Do they want to exterminate all Germans? We don't need to speculate on how the British and the Russians feel. Today, the British Army has begun to pay back the Germans for the defeat at Dunkirk. But the British have non-military objectives, too. The part they're playing in this invasion puts them in position to become the controlling, if not the dominating power in Western Europe after the war. Most of the exiled governments have maintained headquarters in London, and they and their people owe the British a heavy debt, which the British are in position to collect, provided, that is, that British casualties do not run up to nearly 1 million men as they did during the last war. For the British, with their declining birth rate, cannot lose another 1 million young men and expect to remain a great power, especially now that they must double their export trade after the war in order to make up for the loss of revenue from foreign investments that the war has liquidated. The Russians have suffered far heavier losses than the British, but they have far greater reserves of manpower and natural resources on which to draw. As a great power, perhaps the great power of the second half of the 20th century, the Russians simply cannot miss. Today's landings in Western Europe not only improve Russia's military prospects by confronting Hitler with a three-front war, the Russians now have tangible practical proof that they can do business with Britain and the United States in war, and if war, in war, why not in peace? These prospects depress the Germans, and the Japanese, too, every bit as much as they gratify the Russians. The Germans now have this three-front military war in their hands, and the Anglo-Soviet-American coalition never looked stronger. And the prospects of Germany's defeat means that Japan's day of reckoning draws near, with Russia more closely tied to the Anglo-American powers. But for the United States, today's news has a unique significance. If our fighting men are not carrying more than their share of the first attack, it's at any rate certain that American supplies, American resources, and American reserves form the backbone of the whole vast enterprise of liberating Western Europe. Yet no responsible American has suggested that Europe be divided into spheres of influence. The whole sense of President Roosevelt's prayer was that our country is fighting for a better world, and we've put far more into this war than we put into the last one when we fought for the same general purpose. For this war has brought the United States to the peak of its military, its economic, and its moral power. The United States has now thrown all this power into the greatest military campaign and the most ambitious program of popular liberation in all history. Our military prospects look good, but whether victory comes quick or slow, its cost comes high. At this moment in history, no nation can challenge our position or our power. How responsibly we use that position and that power will determine the future of our people.
That was Quincy Howe in another analysis presented by CBS World News. Tomorrow night, William L. Scherer. This is CBS, the Columbia Broadcasting System.
At this time, Columbia brings you Joan Brooks. We will interrupt this program to bring you any late news developments.
If you were the only boy in the world, and I were the only girl, nothing else would matter in the world today. We would go on loving in the same old way.
Once again, CBS brings you 15 minutes of words and music by Joan Brooks, the girl with a voice you won't forget. Tonight, Joan respectfully dedicates her program to all the men and women of the armed forces, wherever they are working and fighting for their country. Joan begins with Look for the Silver Lining.
Look for the silver lining whenever clouds appear in the blue. Remember somewhere the sun is shining, and so the right thing to do is make it shine for you a heart full of of joy and gladness will always banish sadness and strife. So always look for the silver lining, and you will find the sunny side of life. Full of joy and gladness will always banish sadness and strife. So always look for the silver lining, and you will find the sunny side of life.
It's Valentine, which, as you know, means Joan Brooks is going to sing three of the day's most romantic tunes. Here they are: Going My Way, Amor, and I Don't Want to Love You.
This road leads to Rainbowville, going my way. Up ahead is Bluebird Hill, going my way. Just pack a basket full of wishes, and off you start with Sunday morning in your heart. Round the bend you'll see a sign, Dreamer's Highway. Happiness is down the line, going my way. The smiles you'll gather will look well on you, dear. How I hope you're going my way too. Amor, I don't want to love you. Please, this. If I own that you could feel how it would kiss you. Pray me, I'd just be getting deeper in my. And if I were my dream, then I don't want to love you like
Carrying on in the mood of romance, Archie Blyer and the orchestra wend their way.
I'm dedicating tonight's program to all of our fighting forces and to the people at home whose hopes and prayers go with them. For everyone who has worked, for the men and women of America. Sweetheart, if you should stray a million miles away, I'll always be in love with you. Someone else's kiss, I'll always be in love. I can't do any more. I've tried so hard to please, but let me thank you for such tender memories. I wish you happiness. As for me, sweetheart, I guess I'll always be in love with you. But let me thank you for such tender memories. I wish you happiness, sweetheart, I guess I'll always be in love with you. I hope you all enjoyed this and the best of luck. Good night, everyone. Good night, wherever you are.
That melody is our promise that Joan Brooks will be back with a heart full every Monday through Friday over most of these same stations. Until tomorrow, then, let's say so long for now to Columbia. Joe Week speaking. This is CBS, the Columbia Broadcasting System.
CBS News headquarters in New York, Bob Trout speaking. We're about to bring you from London the first eyewitness recording of the shore bombardment preceding the actual landings of the invasion on D-Day and a description of Allied landing craft going into the beach. A recording made by George Hicks representing the combined American networks. So we take you now to London to hear George Hicks in a recording made aboard an American warship at sea. Go ahead, London. This is Bob Trout at our news headquarters in New York. We're trying to bring you a pool broadcast, the first eyewitness recording of the shore bombardment made by George Hicks aboard an American warship at sea. We'll try again. Go ahead, London.
Planes are high up in the thin cloud, which is a gray screen over the sky, but which is not thick nor heavy, and not low enough to be an inconvenience to bombing. The LCTs and the LCIs have begun to pass along the side of us. Those are the amphibious beach landing craft that carry the tanks, trucks, bulldozers, and finally the men ashore. They've been churning along and are bouncing around in the choppy Channel Sea now. And all around us, on either side, are stretched the fast transports at anchor who have disembarked these small craft. And they, all over the surface of the sea here, can be seen cutting and zigzagging and then forming into those somewhat irregular lines.
We regret that due to conditions beyond our control, the recording of the special broadcast for the American networks by George Hicks will be delayed for a few moments. We return you now to the United States. Columbia's news headquarters in New York. We'll keep the air here until such time as Columbia's correspondent Charles Shaw, whom we just heard speaking in London, until such time as he tells us that the pool recording is ready to go. You heard a few words of it. We regret that we're having trouble with our contact with London tonight. You heard a few words of the recording. It was a recording, an eyewitness recording of the shore bombardment preceding the actual landings of the invasion on D-Day, and a description of the Allied landing craft going into their beach. A recording made by George Hicks, representing the combined American networks. It's one of those broadcasts that we call a pool broadcast. That's the arrangement that has been fixed up during the first days of the invasion in order that everyone may share everyone else's dispatches. However, this was not the story of a correspondent who had seen part of the operation and had returned to tell about it. This was an eyewitness recording of the bombardment as it went on. We hope that later we shall be able to bring it to you. The difficulty seems to be in London, as you heard our CBS correspondent in London, Charles Shaw, explaining to you a few moments ago. Meanwhile, we have a few dispatches that you may or may not have heard of as you keep track of the news that is coming into Columbia's news headquarters in New York. Supreme Headquarters of the Allied Expeditionary Force announced in London this evening that General Eisenhower is directing the invasion of Western Europe from an advanced outpost in England. This denies a report which was broadcast by the Brazzaville radio that the commander had established headquarters on French soil. Also, we're told that Sir Bernard Montgomery held an informal meeting with reporters on Tuesday and expressed pleasure at the official announcement of his appointment as the Allied assault commander because, he said, I always get along with the Americans. Despite the brand new uniform from the United States which accompanied the appointment, General Montgomery was attired in his usual beret, gray sweater, and faded slacks. He was very pleased with his new American uniform, which had come straight from New York, and the Americans also had given General Montgomery a watch. A good watch, he said. It keeps time. We've been informed now that shortly we expect to be able to go to London and to bring you the pool recording which we'd introduced a few moments ago. That is, the eyewitness recording of the shore bombardment preceding the invasion and a description of Allied landing craft given by George Hicks. Go ahead, London.
This is George Hicks speaking. I'm speaking now from the tower above the signal bridge of an American naval flagship, and we're lying some few miles off the coast of France where the invasion of Europe has begun. It's now 20 minutes to 6, and the landing craft have been disembarked from their motherships and are moving in long, irregular lines toward the horizon of France, which is very plain to the naked eye. Our own bombardment fleet, lying out beyond us, has begun to blast the shoreline, and we can see the vivid yellow bursts of flames quite clearly, although the sound is too far away to be heard, and at the same time, from the shore, are answering yellow flames as the Nazi batteries are replying. Overhead, planes are high up in the thin cloud, which is a gray screen over the sky, but which is not thick nor heavy, and not low enough to be an inconvenience to bombing. The LCTs and the LCIs have begun to pass along the side of it. Those are the amphibious beach landing craft that carry the tanks, trucks, bulldozers, and finally the men ashore. They've been churning along and are bouncing around in the choppy Channel Sea now. And all around us, on either side, are stretched the fast transports at anchor who have disembarked these small craft. And they, all over the surface of the sea here, can be seen cutting and zigzagging and then forming into those somewhat irregular lines that make a black pencil point across the sea itself, heading toward the ribbon of land that's France and the coast of Normandy. We can see the wreaths of smoke that are beginning to puff up, both black and white, on the shoreline. France, at this particular part of its northwestern sea coast, has a rather shallow beach and then steep cliffs of 100 to 200 feet, and then the rolling land beyond. This area is between Cherbourg and Le Havre. The wind has increased rather than diminished during the night and is now blowing an 18-knot wind, which is pretty stiff and is kicking up whitecaps. However, the landing beach craft are going in and are plowing through the choppy sea and seem to be making good headway. The order of the attack is for a naval bombardment, an air bombardment, and then landing crafts going in carrying tanks, then a wave of infantry to take the first toehold on the beaches, and then a wave of the beach demolition engineers who will knock out with hand charges the underwater obstacles and those on the shore itself. It's now becoming quite clear and daylight as 6 a.m. approaches on June 6, 1944. Occasionally, in the stiff wind that's whipping around our platform, we can hear the thud of shells or bombs landing on the French coastline, perhaps 8 or 10 miles before us. And the steel plates on which we stand vibrate from the concussion of the heavy guns that are firing from the American and British battleships and heavy cruisers forming a long line right behind us. I can count 22 of the squat, square-nosed landing craft carrying vehicles along one side of it as they turn and bounce in the choppy sea, waiting the exact timing to form their lines and start in toward the beach. When I had first begun speaking to you, it was the shore batteries of the Nazis that had spotted us here at sea and opened up, and our naval bombardment squad has replied to them. One battleship is in as close as 3 miles, and one of the famous American battleships, the Texas, is out 6 miles in her firing position. The duel is in progress now between a battleship lying just a couple of miles off the French shore and firing broadsides into the land. The Germans are replying from the land with flashes, and then the battleship lets go with its entire broadside again. The whole side of the battle wagon lights up in a yellow glare as her broadside goes off, and now we can see brown-gray smoke drifting up from her gun barrels. Huge mushrooms of black and gray smoke are beginning to pile up off the beachheads of France. Directly before us, probably air bombardment. The 2 columns are beginning to rise higher than the hills behind them. And to the left is another single column. It's just burst then on the top of the cliff above the chalk wall facing the sea, and puffs of smoke are standing up now like plumes. A fire has been started on the beach front directly before us, and now batteries are firing from the beach, flashes of yellow, and the broadsides of the battleships are pouring it back at them. Overhead, high, planes are roaring. I think they just came in and dropped a salvo of bombs, a stick, on that the hilltop directly before us that we spoke of a moment ago. A more flight of flying fortresses are passing over the invasion fleet. Bats can hear the roaring of their motors. 36, 38 planes against the wind that's rushing through the rigging of this mast top. Heavy bombardment, naval guns, ships seem to be even closer to the French shore now, hugging in along the coastline and blasting out their blossoms of yellow fire. There have been replies from the shore, but low, gray pink clouds have set down over the coast of France. For a moment now, we're unable to see the outline of the land. Although over into the east, the sky has opened up. The loudspeaker on this flagship has been announcing almost continuously. The Spitfires on our starboard bow. P-38 dead ahead. The air support. Here comes 4 P-38s now, following the fort. The air has simply been crisscrossed with Allied planes of all types. The tank carrying and vehicle carrying landing craft have passed our ships and are beginning to form their line, which is already pointed toward the French coast. The earlier and smaller LCVPs, which carry infantry and personnel, have been en route now over 40 minutes, and according to the time schedule, should be hitting the French shore in 10 minutes from now. Everywhere you look in this jangled English Channel, which is green and gold with the rifts of sunlight coming through broken clouds, everywhere you look are big little ships of all kinds, the types that you almost have never seen before. The wind seems to be increasing in velocity, and it looks as though weather has turned a bit against it on the opening day's phase. The Augusta, one of America's famous cruisers, is in off the shore there blasting, as well as the Texas, the Nevada, and the Arkansas. Old battleships and slow, but with terrific armament. 14-inch guns. They're just anchored off and blowing into the Nazi batteries on shore. It's now just a couple of minutes past 6:30 in the morning. First, the Allied forces are reaching the beaches in France. And that's the latest news that we can bring you from the invasion beachhead as it just now reaches H hour. This is George Hicks speaking. I now return you to the United States.
Back at Columbia's news headquarters in New York, what we have been hearing is the first eyewitness recording of the shore bombardment preceding the actual landings of the invasion and a description of Allied landing craft going into their beach. It's a recording which was made on D-Day just before H hour by George Hicks, who was representing the combined American networks. And the recording was played for us in London. Incidentally, you may have heard Mr. Hicks speak of the weather. He mentioned it several times and said it was worsening. He said the wind was picking up, and at one point he said there was a wind with a velocity of 18 knots. About an hour ago, I believe it was, Columbia's correspondent in London gave us a fresh dispatch, which of course was a later dispatch than George Hicks' recording, and Mr. Merrill told us that the weather in the channel is definitely worse. Mr. Merrill's news was almost 24 hours later than Mr. Hicks' recording. Mr. Merrill said there's a strong wind blowing across the channel tonight. and sizable waves are hitting the beaches, which will increase our problems of supply. Also, Mr. Morrow said that Britain's big bombers, the big heavy night bombers of the Royal Air Force, have again crossed the Channel, but so far tonight we have no details. Late this evening, according to Royal Air Force pilots returning from low-level flights over the beachheads, the Allied troops are moving inward. The Royal Air Force pilots report that there is no longer any opposition on the beaches on which we landed. These beaches are now completely in Allied hands. And one of the returning Royal Air Force pilots said, "We could tell easily that the beaches are secure. We could see our soldiers below standing up. We could see our tanks moving up on Caen, and in the area inland we saw several fires. They looked like gasoline dumps. When we left after the last sorties, we could see no enemy infantry at this point near the coast. Our balloons were already over the landing beaches, guarding the ships from low-level attack by any German fighters which might be about. But the lack of air opposition from the German Air Force was fantastic." That's the word that these Royal Air Force fighter pilots who made low-level flights over the beachheads, that's the word they use to describe the lack of air opposition from the German Air Force. They say, fantastic. And now here's a word from an American transport pilot, Lieutenant James B. Crawley of Springfield, Illinois, a United States Army 9th Air Force C-47 transport pilot who flew 2 loads of paratroops and supplies behind the German lines in the invasion, reports that on his last trip, Tuesday, he saw American soldiers lounging on the French roads. He could look down below and see them there. And Lieutenant Crawley said the doughboys were leaning on their rifles and they were quietly awaiting mess call. A German broadcast, which was heard here in New York tonight, said that heavy German tank attacks have been launched against the Allied beachhead east of Cherbourg. This German broadcast, beamed to the United States, claims that beachhead forces have been wiped out 15 miles northwest of Caen and also Isigny, which is 32 miles west-northwest of the town of Caen. That's a German broadcast. It was made in the English language. It was beamed to the United States. It is what the Germans want us to think at this moment. We have no news of any kind that has anything to do with that information, if that's what we shall call it, which has been sent in a German broadcast beamed to the United States. Bring you up to date a little bit. We were going to go to England, as a matter of fact, in a few moments. We're still waiting for the signal, and I'll bring you up to date a little bit farther before we make the switch. Earlier, if you were with us, you heard us telling you that the first ground forces to land on the French beaches were Americans. But about an hour before the landing was made on the beaches, combined British and American paratroopers shared the honors of being the first soldiers to set foot on French soil. These paratroopers battled the Germans for several hours before the main landings on the beaches. A bit later, we got a dispatch from the Canadians, and that dispatch tells us that the men who sought revenge for the landing at Dieppe took just 2 hours and 45 minutes to establish the beachhead assigned to them. The Canadians overcame numerous steel and wooden obstacles placed in the tidal approaches, and they also plowed through fierce enemy beachhead fire. And then the Canadians went on to stiff street fighting in little coast towns. We're still waiting at Columbia's news headquarters here in New York for word that our Columbia correspondent in London is ready. We haven't had such word. And so while we're waiting, Columbia's war correspondent Quentin Reynolds has been sitting at the desk beside me here in our news headquarters. He was going to speak to us a bit later after we'd picked up London. We'll have London shortly, we expect. And now here is Quentin Reynolds to discuss for us the relationship between United States and British troops taking part in the landings. Quentin Reynolds.
A few moments ago, a report came in here from London saying that today General Montgomery held a press conference at which he told correspondents that he had just received a present, a brand new watch from a group of Americans. It's a good watch, too, Monty grinned to the correspondents. It keeps time. Then Montgomery added, I always get along well with Americans. In one of the earlier reports from a London CBS correspondent today, we heard that the cooperation between American and British troops had been beautiful. This gift to the general from a group of American civilians is merely a reflection of the fine cooperation which exists between the British and the American fighting men once they get into action. This comes as no surprise to anyone who has been with our troops abroad and has been with the British abroad. Comes as no surprise to anyone who knows how General Eisenhower operates. this might be a good time to bring the whole subject of relations between British and American troops right out into the open. 2 years ago, we used to hear of occasional clashes in London between American and British soldiers. They would meet at dances, at pubs. They'd have a few beers, and sometimes a careless word would be spoken. The fur would fly, and stories would go out that British and Americans just couldn't get along. The truth of it is, and I was there in London then, that the British and American soldiers had no chance to meet on any common ground of respect for each other. They only knew each other when they were on leave, playing. Then we landed in North Africa, and the real fighting began for us. Our boys found it tough. It was the first time they'd been in combat. Finally, they joined forces with Montgomery's 8th Army. Now, for the first time, they got a chance to see the British soldier in action. The 8th Army had learned its trade the hard way, through 3 hard, bitter years of desert fighting. This was probably the greatest of all armies. Our boys now looked at the British through different eyes. These were fighting devils who never asked what the odds were. The 8th Army had a motto, attack and pursue. Our boys liked that. It's the American tradition to like offensive fighters. Jack Dempsey is still a hero to millions of us. The 8th Army is the Jack Dempsey of this war. When General Eisenhower was selected to be the supreme commander of all Allied forces, the greatest cheers came from British officers and men who recognized the genius of this brilliant yet human American commander. Then Eisenhower, looking the field over, chose as his ground commander General Montgomery. He asked Montgomery whom he would like to have as his second in command. Monty didn't hesitate a moment. He immediately said, General Omar Bradley. Bradley commanded the 2nd Corps in the Sicilian campaign. In our high command, no distinction was made as to whether an officer was American or British. The only question was, who was the best man? I remember when the Salerno campaign was being planned. Colonel Darby was in command of our Rangers. Brilliant Colonel Darby, one of the real heroes of this war, only 27 and the toughest Ranger of them all. He was to command a combined force of American Rangers and British commandos, and they were to storm the heights above Salerno and secure a pass that led to Naples. The commandos were led by a British general, Brigadier Richardson. He was asked to retire from the operation because Darby, who was to be in charge of it, was only a colonel, and military tradition was all against a brigadier serving under a colonel. The British brigadier went to General Eisenhower. He protested and insisted that he go along with the commandos and the Rangers on the operation, and he added sincerely, I know Colonel Darby. I will consider it a privilege to serve under him in any capacity. And so for the first time in history, a brigadier served under a colonel, and the two made a beautiful team, a typical Eisenhower team, a typical example of the way British and American officers and fighting men serve and work together. I remember just 3 days after we landed at Salerno, our 36th Division of Texas had had a very tough 3 days. They'd fought bravely, but the German 88s high in the hills commanding the beaches had taken a frightful toll. I went ashore and joined them and talked to the men. A big strapping sergeant asked me, hey, when are them Limeys going to get up here to help us out? I couldn't help but kid him a little. I said, I remember when you guys used to kid the British. Now you need them. Now you want their help. Yeah, that's right, the big Texan grinned. But that was before we saw them fight. I sure would like to see that little Montgomery in his funny black beret walking along this beach. Well, a few days later, Monty and his 8th Army did join our 5th Army, and the result is history. Now when our men call the British soldier a limey, he grins when he says it, and the British soldier grins back. They have a firm basis of respect for each other. Both are great fighting men, and fighting men can get along pretty well together anywhere. This is Eisenhower's way. Don't worry about our boys not getting along with their British comrades in arms. They're both fighting on the same side under two great men and months. I return you now to Bob Trout.
That was Quentin Reynolds here at our news headquarters in New York. And now at almost 6 o'clock in the morning in London, we're going to switch you to London once again. And this time we're going to hear from Columbia's correspondent, Charles Shaw. Go ahead, London.
It's almost 6 a.m. in London, and the invasion news reaching here is still favorable. The weather in the Channel still leaves much to be desired, but it's believed that reinforcements are continuing to flow across to France without interruption. Allied commanders are optimistic, and the German radio still is making no attempt to disguise the magnitude of the Allied attack. All has gone well on D-Day. The liberation of Europe is not being accomplished by robots. The story of the Second Front is the story of your son, your kid brother, and of men whose personalities and achievements have commanded the headlines. From commanders down to buck privates, the Allied invasion army is a human army. General Montgomery was beaming today, not only because he was proud to have been officially revealed as the Allied invasion commander, but also because he had been given a new battle dress and a new watch by the American Army. The invasion troops were proud that they had been selected for participation in the greatest show on earth, although they fully realized that they weren't in for any picnic. A veteran of Dunkirk cried, and admitted he cried, when he flew his Spitfire over the French coast to help his earth and sea-bound buddies take the road back. A French pilot was thrilled at the sight of his homeland, even though he had to drop bombs on it, because he said it meant that he was on his way home. General Montgomery said he was happy to be the Allied assault commander because I always get along well with Americans. As proof that he gets along well with our folks, he drew attention to his new battle dress, the finest suit I ever had, and his new watch, a good one which keeps time. General Montgomery has been confident all day long, but he warned that there may be a bit of a roughhouse before we are finished. Montgomery's boss, General Eisenhower, also impressed correspondents with his confidence. But the greatest impression he made came from his visits to his troops just before H hour and the informal way he talked with the soldiers. He asked the members of one airborne outfit who was their toughest soldier. One GI answered, "Wait until we land, and then we'll find out." The general asked the outfit to send their champion back to him, and he'd have something for him. But today was not a general's day. It was the GI's and the junior officers' day. The generals had done everything they could. Success of the initial operations depended on the GIs and the shaved-tails who led them. It depended on the sailors and Coast Guardsmen who manned the invasion craft and the warships. There were admirals at sea today also, but the execution of their orders depended on the braidless boys.